talk,
identity,
and access
management.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast, episode number 28. This is the premier podcast, Jim, for IAM Talk. I'm Jeff. Hey, Jim, how you doing?
Good, Jeff. This is going to be as exciting as a MMA fight, I'm sure.
Hopefully a little bit longer than the last one.
Yeah, UFC 267 or whatever. This is where it all happens.
Yeah, I watch every once in a while, just kind of the clips and stuff like that. And, you know, I saw McGregor won, like, what, a minute?
Yeah.
He got paid handsomely for that.
I was watching some of the undercard matches, and I don't know, that sport's just too bloody for me. I just don't enjoy watching people beat each other to a bloody pulp. But I do like watching like you said, the highlights and everything. That's about enough for me.
The especially bloody parts. Well, it's the new Roman Colosseum. It's the new Gladiator, right? I mean, most sports are like that now, and this is definitely, I think MMA is definitely more primal, obviously.
Yeah, for sure.
Football's like that too. Speaking of football, my 49ers are in the Super Bowl.
And where are you going to be watching the game, Jeff?
This is killing me because I'm going to be on an airplane basically for the entire Super Bowl next week. I will be somewhere over the skies of Ohio or Pennsylvania or New York. I'm hopeful that I'll land in time to be able to catch the end of it, but I wasn't thinking when I came up with this schedule, and now I'm paying for it.
Yeah, I think I would have changed my flight, flew on Saturday, and got to my hotel room and had gone to like I don't know, Chili's or something. That's a game. I don't know.
Yeah, have a nice little tailgate party in my hotel room. Just watch it by myself.
Yeah.
I guess that would be better than that.
It's better than missing it.
Yeah, that's true. So I have to figure it out. I don't know if United's going to have Wi-Fi available on the flight that I'll have, but maybe I can figure out some to stream it or find some kind of workaround.
Is that on Fox? Do you know what who's broadcasting it?
I think it's on Fox.
Okay.
Because I think Joe Buck is calling it.
Your favorite.
Never mind. We don't want to go into that one.
Yeah.
What do we want to go in today, though? I think we want to talk metrics, right? How do we measure an IAM program?
Right.
And I know you sent me an article recently. It was a Forbes article that talked about some cybersecurity metrics that every CEO should know and track. Why don't we start there?
Yeah, and so I mean, I really looked at the metrics, and they had a lot to do with dealing with cybersecurity events, triaging them, how long it would take to triage, how long it would take to solve, and things like that. And I thought, it's not really, specifically relevant to an IAM program manager. It's kind of higher up the cybersecurity ladder, looking at it from defending the perimeter perspective. But there were a few cool things I pulled out of the article. I thought that were cool. And then I started saying, if I'm an IAM program manager, which I have been, what are the key metrics that I feel like should be a part of what we're reporting on a periodic basis? And I mean, that right there is a discussion. What does periodic basis mean? How often should you be disseminating metrics, and in what form? So a couple of the things that I pulled from the article. So one of them was develop and agree on an initial set of metrics that span your defined operational capabilities, ensure that there's transparency and consistency in how each metric will be measured. And I think this.
All right. First of all, how do you translate that? Right, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, it was kind of a mouthful, so I translated it as getting agreement on the metrics. So I as an IAM program manager is going to be sending these metrics to somebody. Are they going to get them and look at them and say, I don't care?
Right.
This is meaningless to me. And so that's what we want to avoid. So for me, what this was all about was getting with those folks and saying, well, these are the metrics I think are important. What do you think? Do these matter to you? The answer is yes. You're in a great spot. Then you find out what else would they like to see. If the answer is no, then okay, why not? And what would you like to see instead? What would be more important to you? And regardless, I mean, if you're going to be sending them information, it's got to be something that they care about. Otherwise, you're wasting.
Yeah, you don't want to waste your own time too, building up a whole bunch of metrics that nobody's ever going to see or care about, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And normally you're sending these to folks who are, influential in your career. Maybe they're higher ups, maybe they're your peers. But regardless, you want to make sure that it's information they care about. The other thing I pulled from the article that I thought was really good was invest in the ability to capture and record the initial metrics on a quarterly basis. So, in other words, there's going to be some investment. It could be as simple as somebody spending time pulling data into a spreadsheet and crunching the numbers, but there's some level of investment. Sometimes it's going to take a technology investment, but if the metrics are important, if people actually care about them, and you did that first step, then I think that you should be able to use that to justify or help justify whatever investments required to get those metrics.
Yeah, and I think some of it too is, are you able to accurately report some of those metrics too, right? When you're making that agreement and figuring out what you want to measure, is it something that's possible? It might not be possible now, but as you move along the program and maybe there's an investment in technology or reporting, whatever it may be, you may be able to develop new metrics down the road that you can't today, or that if you did today would be very time consuming and or maybe not as accurate as you'd like it to.
Right. Yeah. And obviously some of the metrics you would want to report may be as simple as just running a database query or running a report from your service management system or wherever you're tracking certain things like password resets. But that's usually going to be pretty basic information. How many password resets did we deal with this month? Things like that. And it's not that there's not value, but I think you need to put that into context. So if, for example, you're saying, all right, try this cost or next week, we roll it out, new password complexity, expected to stop, or we force people passwords. We roll out, different technology. And I love using like time graphs to kind of show like, all right, this month we had 800 calls. The following month we had 810 calls. The month after that it was 805. So you see, okay. And then we upped the password complexity to 10 characters and we forced everyone to change their password, 1,600 calls. And then it was, then it leveled back out to 800. And then we rolled out password self-service and it dropped the number. And then you can kind of like, so you could tag that month with a little, flag or something that says this is what we did then. And that's why. So that takes an investment of time, but it really communicates like, we're making these investments. We're coming to you and saying we're going to do these investments, and it's going to give us some benefit. It's going to give the company benefit, and then it's coming back and showing what that benefit is.
Right. Yeah, I like the time-based ones too, but like you said, it's an investment of time, because how far back are you able to go back and get information to show that history, right? So I kind of think of it almost like a history metric. In order to have that, you have to have the history. So if you want to show improvement in any standpoint, you have to be able to pull that information. And I compare that to other metrics maybe that are less historical and more maybe compliance based. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's right on. I mean, one of the things that I think as an organization, you need to comply with your own policy, right? I mean,
whoa, easy, Jim. Easy.
It doesn't fit for everybody. I'm sure some people are rolling their eyes and saying, well, my company, policies don't get us anywhere. But okay, then what are the drivers? And, your policy should reflect what you're driving toward. If you have obviously external compliance standards that you need to comply with, regulatory standards, then you should have policies that enforce being in compliance with those standards. So I think it's ultimately the organization policies that need to be complied with. And if you can provide metrics in terms of, how well you are complying with your own policies, and you can even highlight some of the key policies that hit home with the people you're disseminating these metrics to. But if you can say, we're only 50% compliant with our authentication policies, or maybe this business unit is 100% compliant. This business unit is 100% compliant. This business unit over here, 10% compliant. And then the chief IT person from that business unit should say, why are we only 10% compliant? Everybody else is 100% compliant. And go back to their lieutenants, if you will, and say, what's going on, guys and girls? What's the problem here? And, it's kind of a process where you're almost shaming people into complying with the policies in a way, but it's creating visibility around it. I find is one of the ways to, get steam behind information security initiatives, because a lot of times information security doesn't wield a stick. It's kind of a carrot approach, and it's influence to get people to comply. And as far as I'm concerned, visibility is a very key way to influence.
Yeah, and the nice thing about having metrics available to show that is that it's difficult to argue against numbers. Not saying it can't be done, but it is more factual based and gets away from more of a subjective analysis that people might have around compliance. Sometimes it's not as simple as a yes or no, but numbers help tell that story. What are some examples of a compliance that authentication compliance metric that you can?
So ultimately, if you have any kind of central authentication tool like an IDP system, ADFS, Okta, Ping, something like that, where you've invested corporate resources in, you may want, your goal may be to get all the applications in your organization to leverage that system. And this is where I think the subjective storyline could help link up with those numbers. So, you have certain business units, 100% of their in scope applications are leveraging that system, and so you're managing policies centrally, and those policies lead to contextual authentication, strong authentication using multi-factor. The password policy is being enforced, things like that. And then you have another business unit where they basically said, we're not doing that, and so we're going to do our own thing, or that's just not in our priority. We're too busy to integrate into that. And they're the 10%. And obviously this is, I came up with a black and white example. It could be that they're 70% compliant. They think it's important, but they don't think it's that important. Mm-hmm. But, the company invested money because they believe in the vision. They want you to get to that. And then you've instituted a policy that systems need to comply by using this system or granting an exception. And by the way, exceptions should be excluded from the calculation of compliance with the policy. If you've granted an exception, you should not say that they're not in compliance. Mm-hmm. I think, and that could be debated. But ultimately, that's something that would be an example.
That makes sense. Yeah, I was going to ask about how you handle exceptions, and I feel the same way. As they've been granted that, so move on, right? Maybe there's some sort of review process that goes along with exceptions. Maybe it's a temporary exception, but
right. Well, I think exceptions should have a time to live. Mm-hmm. 1 year, maybe 2 years, even if they are exceptions such as. So a very common exception is technologically infeasible to integrate a mainframe application that doesn't have a web interface with an IDP that's based on doing SAML or OpenIDC integration. We all understand that, right? You're not going to integrate a green screen with Okta. It just doesn't happen. So you're going to approve that exception, but I think that they should have to come back every year or 2 years to renew the exception. Has anything changed?
Nope, we're still on this mainframe.
Still on the mainframe, and has been the story for a long time. But then, the question should become, okay, well, when are you getting off that mainframe?
Right. Yeah, I know we've had several clients over the years that have looked to get off the mainframe, but they're typically really embedded, right, in the business and the technology and the underlying processes that it's running. And it's very difficult to get out from underneath that without a significant investment.
It is.
And I find it very interesting too, kind of going off on a sidetrack here, is that, for a long time it was, the mainframe people are going to be looking for work because everything's moving to, database and so forth. And then now mainframe people are in demand again because no one knows how to run this stuff, right? Companies need help with it.
There are people coming out of retirement with the Y2K thing.
Yeah.
I'm really dating myself here, but there were people coming out of retirement to help switch things over, get Y2K compliant. And but you kind of thought, these mainframes won't be around long. Well, I know I've done client engagements within the past year where they've had some of the biggest mainframe environments I've ever seen. So it's just, it's the cost benefit of replacing all of that technology that's been built over the years and the processing power. And it's hard to make the case that it should be taken off.
Yeah. So I know that when we kind of go back to that article, there was a couple of different types of metrics. Really, the first set was kind of based around visibility, right? At least being aware of things. And I know that that's one of the things that we always kind of think about is how do you know who has access to what? And then the other one was based on, another big section have been more workflow based, right? So speed and enablement, things like that. What are some workflow type metrics that you think would be interesting to report on or helpful for an organization?
Well, one of the ones that comes to mind is as an easy one. Usually the IAM program is responsible for is access reviews. So if you have a identity governance system in place and you're, collecting and correlating entitlements and accounts from all of your applications, be able to have owners, whether they're managers of the people or application owners, review a list of who has access to these applications. I think from a metric standpoint, what is the total scope that you'd like to be doing access reviews on? How many are actually doing them? So that is something that's valuable early in your program. Let's say you've gotten to 90% plus adoption. You can start getting into, and I've done this in the past, where you report on what percentage of access reviews have actually been performed. Because you have some people, individuals within the business who just think, I'm just too busy. I'm not going to do this. You sent me 5 reminders. I'm deleting them every time they come in. And, most people aren't going to do that, but some people might. And if you can report out that, we've got 100% complete over here, 100% complete, and 100% complete is almost always the goal. 100%, and 98% over here. Well, what's happening? Well, there's 2 or 3 people in this business unit who have not done their access reviews. Well, that the CIO or the director or whoever's kind of the responsible person over that business unit is going to want to know, why aren't they doing them? This is part of the job. You want to work here, you want to have people report to you, you need to do your access reviews. It's not asking too much. So that's a good way to gain visibility and to get people to do their job.
Yeah. What about things like onboarding, offboarding, password resets? I know we kind of talked a little bit before on like ticketing, but what about something along those lines? What would those types of things show?
Yeah, so the first couple that I talked about were really like, what's the help you're getting from the business? But I think another thing you can do with metrics is like show the value that your IAM program is bringing to the organization. What is the amount of work that you do? And showing, growth over time, or, if you're, balancing, manual work versus automated work and how much you're getting done, I think is good, because I think we're always at some level wanting to make sure that people understand that we're bringing value to the table. What do you think?
No, I think that makes sense. I think a lot of it revolves too around the story you want to tell too. So if you're going to build out, a metrics dashboard, what is that dashboard meant to? Who's it going to go to? So if you're going to talk about onboarding, it goes back to what you were talking about earlier. Why do I care? Who cares how number of onboarding is being done by IAM, because the business doesn't really maybe have an involvement with that. So maybe that metric isn't really for the business. So I think that's part of trying to figure out is where do you want these metrics to be communicated to, and what's this? I'm a fan of having 2 different versions of metrics. One that's kind of like private and meant for the internal team only, and another one that's maybe publicly posted that gets promoted out to the organization to show the value that's being brought to the
yeah.
you do something like a steering committee, right? What's the metric that you want to bring to a specific steering committee to drive a conversation? And you talk about compliance, right? Hey, if we're just starting up an IAM program and, we're in the process of, let's say, pulling in applications into a centralized access management or identity governance, so tracking the number of solutions that are connected to that, probably makes sense. But at some point, it's going to become, well, who cares, right? So how do thinking about down the road, well, what's a replacement metric that could be in place for that? Might be, yeah, we're doing this number of onboarding on a specific application. If you're able to pull that kind of data, which most modern identity governance solutions should be able to help with, being able to adapt the message over time, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking of that. It's almost like a maturity model. Like you're starting off with very basics, and you're moving into things like roles, and that may be a very catchy something everybody's talking about. We need roles. I mean, they talk to clients all the time. We need our back, and okay, you're on this RBAC journey. How much of your provisioning is happening via roles? If somebody comes in and onboards, how much of their access gets provisioned on day one, for example? How much automation is there around roles, and if they're requestable roles, how much of the coverage is there via requestable roles versus individual entitlement?
Yeah, roles are hard. I mean, I think every company wants to get there or thinks they want to get there. But over the last, 4 years of me being in the consulting space, I think I've only seen maybe 1 or 2 organizations that have actually gone to that level of act, from a provisioning standpoint.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's like isolated to the business areas that really adopt it, and others say we've got other priorities.
Right. What about different investments? I know that, my friend Jody was looking for some help with trying to talk about how to communicate the value of IAM as part of investment. And one of the ideas I came up with was plotting the investment along with, maturity ranking. And it got me thinking, maturity rankings are good for a certain amount of time, but the bar is consistently moving. So, what is a 100% score today might only be a 50% score in the future. How do you address something like that where the target might be a moving target on the program?
Yeah, well, I mean, for my money, there's 2 polls when it comes to this. One poll is how many people are using the central solution. So if you make an investment in an IDP system, how many people are using it? But then to your point, what is a 100% from an IDP standpoint today, but it'd only be a 50% 3 years from now because the technology is moving and the space is growing and the solutions are getting better. So the 2 polls are how many people are using the central solution, and then the other is the central solution keeping up? Is it keeping up with all the advancements? And so I kind of feel like those are the 2 areas you have to kind of keep an eye on, and if you figure out a way to report on those 2 areas, certainly how many people are using it. That was my first point about compliance. The second one is a little more subjective, but I think as an IAM program manager, you've got to know your space, you've got to know what's out there, and you've got to be able to make those subjective calls.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like situations where MFA wasn't really as prevalent as it is back in the day. And then all of a sudden it becomes, the recommended way go forward by experts and everyone else that's, part of the space. And let's say your organization isn't doing that. Do you introduce that then as a new metric and say, okay, here's how number of percentage of our applications are using multi-factor authentication? And then how would that affect if you've done some sort of assessment in the past where maybe, kind of like what we do, where we say, okay, well, we think you're, a 3 for authentication, and that's, where we think you're at right now. 2 years after that, MFA becomes sort of the de facto gold standard for authentication, and now all of a sudden your maturity drops to a 1. Having that communication with your stakeholders and your steering committee, et cetera, I think is important to recognize that some metrics are a moving target, and that as the industry and as the environment changes, that may affect maturity or other related metrics.
That's right. No, you hit the nail on the head. And The other thing was, I was thinking as you're talking about that, at Gartner this year, in one of the presentations I was in, they said MFA everywhere is the new standard. So, first thing that came to mind was every time I use a new application, it's going to want me to use my authenticator app or, get a pin. And that is ridiculous. And then I thought about it more. I'm like, MFA everywhere doesn't mean that. It means really contextual to know, all right, you've already given your MFA. Now and by the way, MFA can mean a lot of different things. It could be I'm on the right network, I'm using a recognized device. It could be that we accept that, that device has been authenticated within the past 30 days. So we're not going to ask for it again. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's this ultimate disruptive process. But if you're a brand new device showing up for the first time, it doesn't matter what resource you're hitting, you should hit MFA. So what does that mean? Well, if we're using the central IDP and we've got a common set of policies, and it doesn't matter which of the systems that are integrated, you're going to go through that same set of policies. And those policies should be strong enough to say, to give you that MFA everywhere. In other words, it doesn't matter what resource you're hitting. If you haven't hit it before, it's MFA. And that's at least on the enterprise side. On the customer side, maybe it's less so, but I really feel like, we're getting to the point where 100% of people agree username and password, or passwords are not good enough, right? I mean, a bold statement of the day, but I think we're finally getting to the point where nobody tries to argue that passwords are good enough.
Yeah, I'm looking at my web browser right now, and I'm thinking of all the different links that I would click on that do have MFA associated with a service, and I think it's especially challenging because people view MFA as maybe a roadblock, but I think it's really is a standard. So if you have a service that's out there, put MFA on it. That's a sidetrack.
Well, yeah, but every time I go to a website and I want to buy something, and they want me to create a profile, and they ask me to come up, create an account and give them a password, I think to myself, well, great. And when your database gets hacked, my password's going to be out there. And so I have to use
reuse passwords. Yeah.
That's why I have to come up with a unique password. And next time I come back to your site, I'm not going to know what it is. I'm sure I could use, LastPass or something like that. But, then does it work on all my devices? If I'm trying to log in from a new device? No, it's just a pain in the butt. Yeah. And if you had an MFA, I'd be a lot happier.
Yeah. I mean, I think we could have a whole separate discussion on ways to introduce MFA that have less of an impact on the user experience, because that's important, right? You need to make sure that people can use your product, but
and the idea of like using LastPass or something like that, it's kind of like, I almost feel embarrassed if I admit that I don't use it, being that I'm in the industry. But if you talk to most people on the street, they don't even know what LastPass is. They don't even have the concept of it. So, and those are, that's the majority of human beings who are using the internet. I think have no clue.
Well, that's the whole concept around passwords, is people tend to reuse them. Now I'm more of a tech forward person, in case you weren't aware, Jim.
Yeah, so I didn't know that, Chuck.
Yeah. So I've been using LastPass for 7 years, 8 years. I mean, a long time. And, I've put my password in there, but I still reuse passwords every once in a while. It's something that as I come across them, I'm starting to change it into random, and it does provide a little bit of a hassle trying to log into a new application where I have to, dig the password out of my LastPass, whether it's the browser or iOS. It's, integrated with the keychain that way. So it's definitely not the easiest thing. And I think that goes back to the user experience of having some sort of password vault. Right now, you could do something within Chrome itself as a browser, or Safari has built in, and Microsoft with their new Edge browser, and really all their browsers have always had some sort of password. Not the most secure thing, but if you get into the habit of just creating a random password and then storing it somewhere, you can get into that mindset. I think people become a lot more secure. The challenge, the ease of use, being able to do that quickly when you want to log into.
Makes sense to me, man.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we hit this topic pretty good. What do you think?
Yeah. So from a metric standpoint, right, being able to track visibility is one thing, and then being able to track workflow and being able to understand what the effectiveness is of the different processes or technologies that you've put in place are important. For me, at least, being able to differentiate between what is an internal metric, meaning, for your team only or for your eyes only, and what's something that you're willing to publish and put out there, from a measurement standpoint. Sometimes those introduce questions that you may not be prepared to answer. So something to think about.
Yeah, my things are, I think you can use metrics to help justify your existence and what value your IAM team is bringing to the organization is probably a better way to put it. And the other is to garner help from leaders in your organization of, these people are just not doing their part to help us keep us secure. They're in your group. We're going to turn over a list. Right. There you go. Go get them.
What is it you would say you do here, Jim?
Yeah. What would you say?
All right.
Not everybody's going to get that reference, Jeff.
I know. That's just us getting older. And it's unfortunate, but true. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there for this week. Appreciate everyone listening. And for more episodes, don't forget to visit identityatthecenter.com. Keep sharing the show out with friends. And if you like the show, and if you don't like the show, share it with your enemies. That's fine too. We're happy to have as many listeners as we can, and look to talk with folks down the road. You've been listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. For more episodes, visit identityatthecenter.com.